Hey pals, today's video is going to deal with several upsetting topics like sexual assault and rape and murder. Yeah, it's going to be a real fun one. So if any of those topics bother you, you might want to give this one a skip or just head over to my Patreon where you can just read the transcript if that's a little easier instead of watching the video. As always, the link to the transcript with all the references is in the description below. Despite the dark themes of today's video, I actually am going to start off with some good news. Serial rapist and Scientologist in good standing Danny Masterson has been sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for his horrific crimes. I talked about this case back in May, but the basic overview is that at least 4 women have told the police that Masterson raped them, almost all of them, I believe, with the use of drugs. After years of investigation, he was finally charged back in 2020, but the jury in that trial deadlocked. Throughout this investigation and trials, the Church of Scientology has been actively interfering in order to protect Masterson. In fact, during this most recent retrial, prosecutors revealed that one of the rape victim's mother informed Scientology higher-ups about Masterson's crimes, but they ignored her. I was pretty pessimistic about how this retrial would end, and it is such a relief to see that I was wrong, because this rich white man who has been protected by Scientology for decades has in fact been held accountable for his crimes against women, which is incredible. However, that concludes the positive news for today. On to the depressing news, which, again, I just have to warn you, it's going to start off depressing, and then it's going to get worse and weirder and worse and weirder until we end up somewhere that you honestly will not believe if you haven't been following this. It's going to be another one of those videos. Let's start with this. A bunch of people that you may know and may have respected wrote into the judge in Masterson's case, pleading that she give him the lightest sentence possible after the jury found him guilty of raping at least 2 women. Considering Scientology's prominent role in this trial, you might not be surprised that several of Masterson's fellow church members wrote in to support him, like Giovanni Ribisi, who described Masterson as ethical and honest. It may be more surprising to learn that people like Billy Baldwin wrote in until you learn that he's married to the sister of Masterson's wife. So, even more surprising might be the support that Masterson got from his friends and former castmates on that 70s show. Red, Kurtwood Smith, Kitty, Deborah Jo Rupp, and, of course, the power couple themselves, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. As far as I know, none of these people are Scientologists, although I do remember Rupp having a Friends storyline with Giovanni Ribisi. And I also heard a rumor a very long time ago that Scientologists, when they get an acting gig, they're supposed to try to pressure the director or producer into getting another lesser-known Scientologist on the cast as well. And also, Rupp did say that that storyline on Friends directly led to her landing that 70s show, which she just so happened to end up starring with another prominent Scientologist. But as far as I know, she's not a Scientologist. I don't know. I just thought I'd throw all that out there. The letters from the Foremans are obviously disappointing to anybody who was a fan of them as actors previously. But more interesting to me are the letters from Kunis and particularly from Kutcher. Like, sure, they're longtime friends of Masterson's, but if my twin brother, who doesn't exist, was convicted of rape, I would not ask a judge for leniency. I just wouldn't. If it were a friend that I'd had since high school, hell no. I would just get another friend, a less rapey friend. Bye. But like the other letter writers, Kunis and Kutcher accept that Masterson has been found guilty of 2 counts of rape, but argue that he's, quote, an amazing friend, confidant, and above all, an outstanding older brother figure to me, is how Kunis puts it. And to her credit, she at least writes like an adult who grew up speaking English, but Kutcher honestly writes like a child who is recounting what he learned in Dare that day. As a role model, Danny has consistently been an excellent one. I attribute not falling into the typical Hollywood life of drugs directly to Danny. Anytime that we were to meet someone or interact with someone who was on drugs or did drugs, he made it clear that that wouldn't be a good person to be friends with. And for me, that was an implication that if I were to do drugs, he wouldn't want to be friends with me, which is something I never would want to risk or jeopardize. Writing style aside, this asshole has the nerve to talk about Masterson's dislike of drugs in a case in which he has been found guilty of using drugs to incapacitate and rape his victims. The absolute audacity. It would be like asking the judge to take it easy on Hannibal Lecter because he mentored you on your journey to establishing a strict vegan lifestyle. Who the fuck are you kidding? Anyway, Kutcher caping for a rapist is particularly rich considering that he has promoted himself as an anti-sex trafficking activist for the past several years. For instance, he got this golden People magazine fluff piece in 2018 proclaiming that his nonprofit organization Thorn, Digital Defenders of Children, assisted law enforcement in identifying 5,894 child sex trafficking victims and rescuing 103 children from situations where their sexual abuse was recorded and distributed last year, according to the organization's own 2017 impact report. So, what's with that? Is it possible that Ashton Kutcher doesn't actually care about people being forced to have sex against their will? Or does he only care about people being raped when they're minors? Is it possible that once a person, usually a woman, is an adult, he doesn't actually care what happens to them or even necessarily believe what they say in regards to being raped? In my opinion, yeah, it's that last one. And it's not just that in this case, it seems Ashton Kutcher doesn't really believe adult women when they say they've been raped. But his anti-sex trafficking organization, Thorn, doesn't seem to believe adult women when they say that they are not being raped. As I mentioned in my video on OUR from a few months back, the anti-sex trafficking industry is pretty problematic as a whole. Thorn itself focuses on collecting vast quantities of information from online advertisements posted by sex workers, taking phone numbers and names and photos and locations, and using Amazon's facial recognition technology to help police identify child sex trafficking victims. The problem is that the vast majority of that data points to consenting adult sex workers who are then harassed by police and forced further underground, which endangers them. In fact, as Engadget reported in 2019, many of the organizations that Thorn partners with literally do not distinguish between consensual sex work and sex trafficking. On the topic of consensual sex work, Journey Out unequivocally states that it is a false perception that sex work could be a woman's choice. Nearly all nonprofits Thorn partners with feel the same way and say so. So much for believing women or any daydreams about women being the ones who control their bodies. And when it comes to helping actual victims, Thorn doesn't fare much better there either. Forbes describes one incident in which cops used the service to track an alleged sex trafficking victim for several months, during which time they observed her being slapped and choked by Michael Wilkins, her alleged sex trafficker. They did nothing to stop that. In order to continue building a case against Wilkins, who also beat another woman so badly that she lost sight in one eye. Now, this is more of a criticism of the police using the tool than the tool itself, but that is also part of the problem. The tool isn't limited to just helping child victims of sexual exploitation. As a researcher at Georgetown Law's Center on Privacy and Technology told Forbes, technology initially intended to serve a narrow purpose like combating human trafficking can easily and quickly expand into a tool for mass surveillance, especially when there is no oversight of these private and philanthropic partnerships between technology creators and law enforcement agencies. And I haven't even discussed how journalists and researchers have repeatedly caught Thorn inflating the number of successes that they've had, or how their facial recognition program is the same one that the ACLU found falsely connected 28 members of Congress with mugshots. Also, I just found this funny. On Thorne's Wikipedia page, the notable supporters list includes Drake, who in his 30s was texting dating advice and I miss yous to 14-year-old Millie Bobby Brown, and 17-year-old Billie Eilish. Then there was Adrian Peterson, who was convicted of beating his own 4-year-old child and then later was arrested for domestic violence that he allegedly committed against his wife on an airplane in a situation so severe that the plane turned around in midair and returned to the airport. And Sean Penn, who has filed lawsuits to stop people from discussing an assault complaint against him. So I'll just quote from this Daily Beast article, which reads, he allegedly smacked and roughed up Madonna while she was tied to a chair and then left for a few hours to buy more booze, leaving his then wife bound and gagged, only to return and continue terrorizing her. He only agreed to untie her after she agreed to perform a degrading sex act on him and then fled the house, got in her car, and raced to the sheriff's office, eventually stumbling inside. I hardly recognized her as Madonna, Lieutenant Bill McSweeney said at the time. She was weeping, her lip was bleeding, and she had obviously been struck. Cool, super cool, notable supporters of your anti-sex trafficking organization. So yeah, when you think about it like all that, it's actually not hypocritical at all for noted anti-sex trafficking activist Ashton Kutcher to disregard or downplay the concerns of women who have been raped by his buddy. There's one more interesting facet to this story that I wanted to discuss, which is related to something that one of Masterson's victims wrote in response to Kutcher's letter to the judge asking for leniency being leaked. And it involves Ashton Kutcher's connection to a brutal murder. Yeah, I told you wouldn't know where this was going. So Chrissy Carnell-Bixler is one of the victims I mentioned in my previous video. She's one of the people that's been really open about her involvement in these cases. She says that Masterson raped her while they were dating in the 1990s and that her public accusations have led Scientologists to stalk and harass her and her husband and to even maybe kill their dogs. Last week, Bixler posted this on Instagram. Dear Ashton, I know the secrets your role model keeps for you, ones that would end you. Did you forget I was there? You were on speakerphone that night you called Danny on February 21st, 2001. I heard everything. I heard the plan. In my opinion, you're just as sick as your mentor. So I am embarrassingly enough a bit of a true crime aficionado, I know, but because of that, I knew what she was referring to. I know what happened on February 21st, 2001. That's the night that 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin was stabbed to death in her Hollywood home. It's also the night that Ashton Kutcher had a date with Ellerin, who he had met just a few months prior. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, let me say that I don't believe that Ashton Kutcher murdered this woman, and I don't think that's what Bixler is implying either. I'll get to what she was implying in a second, but first know that in July of 2021, serial killer Michael Thomas Gargiulo was given the death penalty after being found guilty of that murder, which police said that he had committed after months of stalking and harassing Ellerin. Ashton Kutcher actually testified at that trial, stating that he was late to meet Ellerin to take her to a party. He claimed that he walked up to the door, knocked on it, but no one answered and the door was locked. And so he assumed Ellerin was angry that he had left her waiting for so long, so he left. He said he did glance in the window and he saw some red stains, but he assumed that they were wine stains. When he heard about the murder the next day, he called the police to tell them what happened because his fingerprints were going to be found on the door, and he was, quote, freaking out. But other people, particularly ex-Scientologists, have been telling a different story. Back in February of this year, Aaron Smith-Levin of Growing Up in Scientology published an absolutely wild video in which he says that he's spoken directly with other people who interacted with Kutcher that night. And they say that, in fact, he actually walked into Ellerin's home, saw her laying on the floor covered in blood, panicked, and ran out to his car where he sat there for an hour, frantically calling his team to figure out what he should do in order to avoid a PR disaster. Smith-Levin says that one of the people he called was Danny Masterson, who helped him come up with a plan to distance himself from the murder by not calling the police that night and instead leaving the scene and going to a party as planned and saying nothing until Ellerin was found by her roommate later that night. Smith-Levin goes on to claim that Kutcher's lying to the police created what would have been reasonable doubt for a future defense attorney, which screwed up the investigation to the point that this killer, like the police knew who the killer was, but they had to let him go when he would go on to kill again in the following decades. He says he got this information directly from LAPD detectives who were familiar with the case. Smith-Levin addresses the fact that saying all this leaves him wide open to a defamation lawsuit from Kutcher, but he says that he hopes Kutcher does sue him so that this all becomes a matter of public record. Like I say, the video is wild. Go watch it. Links below. That was back in February. 7 months ago. So let's go back to Bixler's recent Instagram post. She appears to be saying that when Kutcher called Masterson that night, she was there and heard everything on the speakerphone. I cannot tell you if any of this is true. I can tell you that if it isn't true, it's a very weird lie for Bixler to make up. And an even weirder lie for Smith-Levin to believe so fully that he's inviting a millionaire to sue him for defamation. But it is interesting to think about how, if all this is true, it may suggest another reason for Kutcher to plead for leniency in Masterson's case, besides simple friendship. Masterson, and therefore the leadership of the Church of Scientology, would have a lot of leverage over him. So, yeah, that's the update. Justice for Masterson's victims. A bunch of actors have been outed or simply confirmed as rape apologists. Ashton Kutcher's anti-sex trafficking organization is super problematic. And also, he might have lied to police about the brutal murder of a woman in 2001. Man, this is like the second video in a month that just goes completely off the rails. I apologize. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.